Okay, congrats. Hi there, everyone. Someone's leaving. Today's class is number 9, which we are looking at the division of powers or separation of powers, or the institutionalization of regimes in that sense. That we talked about the regime or the political form in terms of as a system of parts. Now we're looking at the operationalization of those parts in terms of what they do, okay, the function, right? The question of function. One of the things we will look at in the future course, next week we will have a quiz, of course, but in fact we're going to be having quizzes for the remaining times, except for the double session. We'll have a quiz and then we'll only have quiz for the double session, quote unquote, because of the beginning of the quiz. No, not for the makeup session. But everything else is set forward for that period. We just reminding is the exam is on the 27th. No, on June. So it's late, so that people have time to study in preparation. If the Erasmus student has an issue with something, please contact me about that. Because maybe you're going back already. I don't know if you're going, what's going on with that. But usually, just please don't make any plans for other people, normal OSA students, to take vacations early. Wait for the end of the exam session. Okay, that's always the safest way. I'm told there's no other exams at this time or this framework, even 2 hours between this. So unless something changes, the exam will stay at the same time, same bat station, same bat room, same bat hour, right? Yeah, here, same time. And the exam will be basically the same format as the quizzes in that sense. It will have the same look. Multiple choice, fill in the blank. Well, you'll see something soon matching. So it's not like I'm going to, it's not really, for first year students, we don't really want to give I didn't want to give essays because you're not finished with the essay section yet, writing course. You're still taking writing, so there's no purpose of writing. I often will give students chances if there is the optional, there was the optional, I don't always give it, sometimes I take it, sometimes I put it in there, the option for an extra credit assignment if they want it, an essay kind of assignment, but it's only optional in that sense for students who think they need it. They think they're looking at their quizzes and their things and they're doing it that. Most people are doing it fair, well on their quizzes, so therefore it's not like there's a couple people who are weak, but they're not that weak in that sense. They're still in the passing range. But if people think that they have a problem, if they want a bonus, I might give a bonus question, which is not a question, it's a bonus. And you're getting bonus points anyways. There's about like, if you look at the number of bonus points, there are bonus points in the quizzes. Like last quiz, we had 2 more questions than they planned for, and that is therefore hidden bonus points, okay? In there, for those who got maximum points, they'll get the bonus points. Therefore, that's why I give some flexibility to myself to fix problems like this. So therefore, that is set forward in there. Just making sure I hit the recording. Yes, I did hit the recording. Yes. Again, so therefore, we have the double session. Just repeating on the 23rd, which is not next week, but the following week. In fact, there's going to be something funny about that. I'm going to be at a conference. The night before, like the day before, and staying at the conference venue, and then coming back. It's right outside of Warsaw, but they're making us stay at the venue. They want people to stay at the palace. There's one of these royal palaces out in the Genova. I forgot it. And they want us to stay at the palace for the conference because it's an international conference. And they said, well, we want you to stay in the conference. I go, I live in Warsaw. Why do I want to stay in the conference for? So it's like 40 minutes back to Warsaw. So my wife said, we'll stay for the 2 nights and then we'll come back. After I teach, basically right after I teach on Tuesday, I have to get. I'm going to be driven. We're going to drive to the conference venue outside of Warsaw, this palace outside of Warsaw, and then stay for go for the introductory thing in the evening dinner and the evening discussion, right? and then stay the night, and then next morning the conference all day long, and then that evening's, and it's my presentation on, there I'm doing a presentation on the, the preconditions for constitutions, okay? We're talking about the preconditions for the Constitution, so the things that are before the Constitution. And then there's going to be other people there. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun. But then next day, we're going to run to class. They said, come to class. My wife's only concern is that you're not going to have a sandwich for class. My wife always wants me to have my diet is you're supposed to have small little meals every day, twice a day, 3 times a day, like a sandwich or something, because if you don't, you have the big meal you want to eat all night that night long, and that's not good for you. So she said, we're not going to have a sandwich. I said, well, you can always go get me something. No, that's joking. I was joking with her. I said, you can always go get me something and bring it to after the class or before the class. And she kind of looked at me like, I said, well, okay, never mind. I can one class I can. We just go to eat before coming to class, and that will be it. And I said, okay. She said, ugh. Even that she growled a little bit, but then again, that's her insistence. When we have our double session the week after next, we'll be talking about the tools of politics. So therefore, the 11th and 12th lecture series are going to be combined. And that's because there's 2 parts. So therefore, I get to have one part. I get to do it in one part, one day, rather than 2 days. Which is okay. Yes, it's kind of my writing. The BA seminar students are kind of happy because they don't have to come to class, because I'm using their class time for you guys. They're kind of happy for one reason, is they have more time to write. They're supposed to have their thesis drafts in then, and they're kind of like asking. All of them are kind of crying and babying, saying, "I want more time. I want more time," which I tell them if they want to graduate in July, they need to get it done sooner, But okay, they want more time, so it's fine with me. I can't control them, I don't write their theses; they write their theses. So they're kind of happy that they're going to have not have to be there that day. So that way we can have the session, right? The same room. We have the same room, but the class that comes after this is my BA seminar. So that's his organizational issues. Okay, that's cleared for the thing. Today's topic. Today's topic is a toughie. Because it actually goes into the question of, well, first of all, let me make this point. We should talk about, one of the things we need to always talk about when we talk about political systems in our time is the question of legitimacy. And I think this goes back even from the beginning first classes, that what legitimizes rule? Okay? What legitimizes rule? Okay? And this is something that should have been kind of dealt with in the discussion of the classical regimes or any regimes. The traditional ancient political science or pre-modern political science. And by pre-modern political science, I mean, the ancient Greek, Romans, the classical world, the early Christian medieval world. In the modern political science, we starting with the point of, say, 15th century, post-Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, Kant, Rousseau, Kant, Hegel, most modern thinkings. The difference is a regime is legitimate in the older system is by its claim to be just. In other words, what is its claim about why should it? How does every regime legitimate itself by its claim? Okay, whereas the modern conception solves the problem through the concept of consent. Okay, in fact, that is the kind of genius of Hobbes. That Hobbes in his Hobbes's political theory does 2 things. He combines legitimization and the origins of political community via the social contract. In other words, the social contract explains how the body politic or the society and body politics comes to be through the parties willing it to be, right, through their consent, hence the term social contract, right? And thus this event, the social contract, does 2 fundamental things. It explains the origin story, or the origins of the political, but it also explains the legitimacy. And in one sense, by doing this, he kind of kills, we could say, the end of philosophy, the end of political philosophy. Because one aspect of political philosophy was the question of justice. What is justice? Well, Hobbes solves the question of justice is what we consent to. What makes a trade right? What makes an exchange right? The consent of the parties. What makes it right, and what is right is what is just in that sense. So therefore, that Hobbes is and the early modern, because it's Hobbes but also other people at the time, but Hobbes is the one who makes it explicit that it is through consent what legitimizes things. But the older tradition was what makes consent work. Yes, the voluntary. People's consent was necessary, but consent was not the primary thing, but usually it didn't show legitimacy, it just made the question of you didn't have to use force. In other words, it was the question of when would you consent to something? When it was just. So the justice of the phenomena was prior to the consent in the classical perception. Because if would people willingly accept the unjust? The answer would be no, right? Therefore, the classical perception, the question of consent or resistance, and the use of coercion, when people consent, there's no need for coercion. When people don't consent, you need coercion, right? That is the nature of all of political reality, coercion. When is coercion necessary? When two reasons. One is when there's people that don't consent, but when would it be legitimate? When would coercion? See, the consent theory that all coercion is illegitimate in this sense. But the classical conception, coercion could be legitimate if the people involved are unjust. In other words, if the claim of something is just, people who resist to doing what is just, well, come on, you have to. In other words, what do you do to break people who break the law? Nothing.
Punish them.
What?
Punish them.
Well, but think about it. It's not just what is punishment? Punishment is merely. Well, but that takes what? That takes force. The application of force on the people. Coercion. Violence.
But if they are breaking the law?
That's still violence. When they come to you and say you don't want to obey, and they're going to use physical force to make you obey, that is still coercion. See, the older conception, coercion becomes legitimate when what? When what is being coerced is what is just, what is required by law. And sometimes it's what we agree to. In other words, in a society, the people or the majority part or the political regime has decided something. The law is what the ruling element, that be it the people, the sovereign, be it the people, the few, or the many, whatever regime in question is the ruling part, has deliberated about what is best for the whole. Okay, and therefore, when you disobey, the level. This is the problem: is how much consent. Do people agree to the rules? In other words, even people, just because you don't have a democratic regime, will people consent to things? Yes. Come on. When you think it's in your interest, would you consent? If you think the policy is in your benefit, will you object to it because someone else? Some people are like that. It's just because if Kaczynski passes the law or Trump passes the law, it must be bad. So even if I'm benefiting from it, I'm going to oppose it, right? This is a partisan conception of even if it's in your own interest, because the other party is doing it, it must not do it, right? This is the kind of psychosis of modern political life, where it's the who is doing it determines whether you think it's good or not. Okay, which is a little bit cuckoo. Because if you're being benefiting, who does it matter benefiting you? In other words, who does it matter? If you're being benefited from it, if you are benefiting, and if it's in your good and it's in your interest. Likewise, when your own side harms you, you understand? I like to remind all the PO voters out there and FPKO voters to take understand this. When your side harms you, hurts your interests, do you then say, "Oh no, it's okay because it's our people doing it"? Okay, it's okay when our people hurt our interests and violate what we think is right, but when the other guy helps us, oh, that's bad. Okay, so this is the weird. This is the. I would say this is the way of how ideology shapes our consciousness. But that's a big thing of political psychology. The role that modern ideology warps our perception of reality. So what's good is bad, and what's bad is good, and what is right is good. You know, the words lose their meaning. Words no longer mean what they mean. They mean whatever the parties who you're inside says it is. It's like, and everyone has to live in doublethink, right? That's the kind of world. So therefore, I bring to, well, I'm sorry, I thought I was showing this. Bad teacher, bad teacher, bad teacher. I thought it was up there and on, but no. See, I was talking to my thing pointing to that, but it's up here. This is the thing of, the classical thing that claims to be just and therefore consent. Now, come on, nice computer. Of course it's not going to work. It's going to do that. No. I hate sometimes. Now the classical regimes and their rule, every regime makes a claim to be what is right, what is right. Every regime made a conception of what is right. It advocated a specific conception of what was right. This claim is connected to the final cause or the purpose of a regime, a particular regime in the classical model. So the ancient classical model of political science took that to be the five fundamental, by they mean reoccurring types of regimes. But some people say, no, there's an asterisk down there and it says, often there are six. Remember that little talk about the six classical regime types, right? But for Aristotle, there's a problem because he uses the same name for all regimes as one. The one type is there. It's a problematic one. Plato gives you the concept of democracy, which Aristotle will say, well, what do you mean by... Aristotle in his Ethics makes fun of democracy because he says time also not only means honor, it also means money. Property. Okay, so and if it's property, why isn't it oligarchy? Okay, so therefore this is a funny thing about that. And Polybius gives us, so for the sixth regime for Plato was democracy, for Aristotle it was regime, but therefore that shows the problematic character. It's the word common for everything, same word for the system, animal called animal, right? The animal called animal. The regime types, different types. Well, this type is called the same name as all regimes. So it should make us think. The purpose of Aristotle's doing that is to make us think that there's something about that character. And Polybius simply uses, for his sixth term, holocracy, which means mob rule. Which mob rule really is kind of the negative conception, and therefore for Polybius, democracy becomes the good regime, where it was for everyone else it was the bad regime. The regime for the interest of the rulers. In other words, it becomes a good regime, a rule for the common good, and mob rule becomes the bad one, right? For Plato, democracy is oligarchy. For Aristotle, only the extreme form of democracy becomes oligarchy. For Aristotle, democracy, there's a big range. There'll be a range, a variety in democracy. For Plato, democracy is pure type. So therefore, this is why we have this conception. Now, this leads us to the famous, each claim has a specific claim of knowledge. Kingship, wisdom, knowledge. Aristocracy means virtue or best, the rule of the best and virtuous, the best, oligarchy, the wealth, those who have wealth, who has the means and resources and owns the most, they decide. It is just that they rule. And democracy, well, democracy is not a positive argument, it's a negative argument. No one has the right to rule over anyone. So we're all equal. Because no one's claim is better to rule over us is equal, no one has a claim to rule over us, therefore we're all equal under the law, and therefore the only political system would allow us to do it is either we all rule together or we rule in turn. We rule in turns. And tyranny's claim is what? Might or power, might makes right. Or what is it? I got the power. Come on, that's or what is that line from Don't Start the Revolution? Oh, no. History of the World Part 1. If you ever saw Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1, where he has the King of France at the time, and he goes, Mel Brooks goes, as the king goes, it's good to be the king. And he's a lecherous old guy doing lots, and he says, it's good to be the king. Why? Because he has the power, and his word and his will is his command. Might makes right. That's the claim of tyranny. What I want is what I want, and I want it, therefore it's right that I have it. Okay? By the way, modern society, you're all like that. You're all little tyrants. You all think in other words, what you all think, and this is what Hobbes says in the state of nature, everyone views, in the state of nature, what is right for you is what you want. And therefore, but in nature, Hobbes' position in the state of nature, since there's no judge and there's no conception of what is right, it is just, in other words, it is just that you have what you want. But this leads to the problem of what? The war of all against all, because I want his computer. You want his computer. Everyone wants his computer. Whose computer belongs to? It's every one of us who wants it, it's ours. Doesn't matter he worked for it or put effort into it. If we want it, it is right. We have a right to whatever we want. The problem is what in nature? We're left to ourselves to enforce our right. So therefore, what ends up happening is we'll all struggle to get his computer and use it. But then once you get it, someone else who wants it will take it from you, and therefore that's the war of all against all, right? So that's why the Hobbesian perception, and by the way, this is funny. Once we bring, we think in civil society, once we create civil society laws and rules, we strip away what we want of our rights. But then what happens when everyone has a right to do what I want again? It destroys the civil society. Once you allow people once you empower people to do what they want again, and they have a right to do whatever they want, then this undermines the basis of society as a whole. And then you fall back into anarchy, war. Now, I talked about that. That is simply just to cover up and generalize and wrap up the regime problem and the legitimacy problem that's tied to it. The modern solution is all consent. The older solution is what really legitimizes a political system is not consent, but rather justice. But justice, every regime makes a different claim of justice. Now the funny part is when you think about wealthy, the king, we think, the kingship. I'm sorry, anyone who argued that let the science determine that remember climate change, and therefore we should let the experts tell us what we should do, or during the COVID crisis we should simply listen to the medicine and do what the medical expert told us to do, right? This conception. Well, what kind of claim was that? Was that a democratic claim? No. It was, what kind of claim was it? It was knowledge claim. Those who know get the power. Those who have the knowledge, those who have the wisdom about something should rule. Technical rule, technocratic rule, is a form of kingship. We're the ones who know, but the problem with any of these claims, and that's what I mean, the radical position of the democratic argument is, okay, you're wealthy. Who really contributes more wealth to the society? The very wealthy or the collective poor together? His famous example is, go try to have a very wealthy person puts on a banquet, two wealthy people put a banquet. But if you have 20,000 people who all bring a dish, what's going to be the better dinner? Who's going to have the better party? He's going to say potluck is going to be much more. You're going to have, if everyone contributes a little bit, you have more. In fact, this is the secret of capitalism. Modern capitalism doesn't work on rich people having the money. It works on the masses, the money of the masses. Their savings plans, the banking system is every little small person puts their monies in the bank, and that gives them so much large amounts of money that the system can loan it out to businesses and things. And then we do that same thing with mutual funds, retirement plans, which then invest in corporations and things like this to make bonds and things like this. So therefore, the modern conception is no longer that a few people or bunch of people are rich. This is why the 1% is a misnomer. The 1% is a misnomer. It's inaccurate. Yes, they're the ones controlling things. But the ownership, the real owners of productions of wealth, it's not just people at large. It's still people's private property. But it's the people's property and being invested in institutions that holds them, saves them, collects them, aggregates it, and that this aggregated wealth is more larger and more vast than any person's, any group's individual wealth. The aggregated power, in other words, individuals, no matter how powerful they are still less powerful than large groups of people aggregating their behavior together. This is why the social or the political always beats the individual. It's because the aggregated ability and aggregated capacity, which really what is what power means. What is power? Power just means the ability to do things. The capacity or ability to do things, to act. That's what only power means. Let me demysticize. We all think power is this magic thing. Always like power is. We talk about in your courses. You'll be talking about power all the time, as though it's this mystical thing that Well, no. It merely means the ability to get you yourselves or others, the ability for you yourselves to do things, or to get others to do it for you. And you can do this through tools like coercion or interest, getting them carrots and sticks, or by attraction. They care for you. People like you. They want to do things for you. So therefore, charisma. Other people are attracted to other people and will want to do them good and benefit. So if this actor is smart enough or understands it, they can suggest to these people who want to do you good things to do good things for you, to carry out your interest. By the way, that is what soft power is. Soft power is the fact that people are attracted to you either as an individual or a society. You like that society, and therefore what do? You do things for that. You do policies or willingness to engage in policies that help that country do what it wants to achieve its interests. This is how we understand that. This is how we understand power. So this is why when we go now to the question of division of labor is what? The functionality of a political system. Every political system is going to have institutionalization and actors who do things. In other words, democracy just doesn't happen accidentally. It also needs institutional structures or actors who are acting as those institutional, who are acting either they're selected by the system or they claim to be selected by the system, or they act for the system. Doesn't matter, but they're acting in the function that they're doing. They're in those actors are therefore then playing a certain role. Now, this is the classic problem of division of powers. We always see something. When does division of powers happen? That's a difficult question because one, we can understand division of powers in two different ways. And the second graph usually is kind of like they say, oh, this is the standard kind of political science thing about the 5 ways political things. But if you really look at these 3, those 5, they're really 2. If you summarize those 5s, right? Like a safeguard against despotism, safeguard against dictatorship tendencies, safeguards against arbitrariness, facilitates a check upon working on each programs and organs, helps maintains efficiency in administration. So let me see this. So therefore, division of labor is ensures effectiveness and efficiency in rule. Division of labor is a division of labor for government. Why? Well, because in a small society, if you have a small scale society, the ruler can do everything. But as it grows, can the ruler do everything? He's going to have deputies, people to do things for him. He has to. When the number of tasks a ruler has is small, then he doesn't need help. But all of a sudden, what happens? What happens when the size of the thing he's governing grows? The population he's growing. The scope of what he's doing is growing. Therefore, his tasks grow too big. What does he need to do? He needs helpers. And what he needs to do, he needs to divide the tasks, delegate to them certain tasks, so he can therefore, the ruler, instead of now doing those tasks, supervise those who do those tasks. This is the classic division of labor. The larger the structure, in fact, this is why Durkheim and other people argue that to create large-scale societies, you need division of labor. If you want to make, in other words, if you're going to have a large-scale society, it can only work if you have you start dividing labor up. In other words, to create large-scale society, it requires a diverse specialization of labor. And diverseness of labor, division of labor. So only when you get to the industrial age and the commercial age, can the division of labor be complex enough to a large mass nations, and in other words, the political formation of nations and larger scale states. Why? Because you have the division of power, the division of labors, and the ability so that there is a market. This is the funny part. Radical libertarians don't understand the market and the forum and the market are the same thing. In other words, the agora is also the marketplace. So the agora is the forum in that sense, the place where the community, the laws, and things like this go. So you cannot have in other words, the market and the market and a political system are kind of connected to each other. Only when there's currency involved, when there's a common currency, when there's a kind of rulemaking and things like this. When it doesn't exist, you can have a market, but it's not a stable market. In other words, you can have a market between different peoples and different tribes. There can be trade and exchange. And there can be kind of agreements on what you use to exchange, like gold or something like that. But there's not a system of arbitration. So therefore, we're left with a concept. that there is the one aspect of the division of powers, or why we have different institutions and functions. It is efficiency, to allow things to do this. Because if one man did it, this wouldn't work. If all institutions were just handled by one department in a large-scale society, this wouldn't work. You need to have division. The larger, the more complex the society, the more you need a diverse structure of offices and institutions delivering those things. Therefore, division of powers. Okay. The other way of division of power. This is This is Roman. This comes from the Roman fear of the king. The Romans, when they create their republic, and because they feared the Rex, they insisted on dividing the power of the king, the punishing power of the king, into functions. Like when they created the council, they just didn't create one council. They did this. They took the king's power and they segregated it. They segregated it with the one thing is the king's power was the councils, 2 councils, and that the councils were equal to each other. So if one council said one thing and the other could nullify it, then it wouldn't happen. So there was always two or more councils. 2 councils always in the Roman system. When they created people's tributes, the tributes were basically the people's voice that could veto things. They couldn't make laws, but they could stop laws. At first there were 2, then they became 5, and as many as 7 in the Republic, at the height of the Republic. Therefore, that's the power of the people to stop something, to veto something they don't like. And if the majority of the tributes agreed, they could convene the people together to exile someone if they didn't like them. And how did the Roman work? And their power of even the lector, even the so-called consuls were not alone. They did not exercise all their power. They had subordinate offices, the lectors, the 12 lectors around them, which carried the sticks. And this is the fasces. It's the symbol of the fasces with the axe, right? You have 2 axes. Why? The 2 consuls. The 2 consuls. That's why the head's double axe. It's 2 axes. And it's surrounded by the 12 sticks. Why? The symbol of the fasces is the symbol of the republic. And that's in the fasces is the representation of the division of powers in the Roman system. It is not the symbol of the king, it's the symbol of, this is ironic, right? The symbol we associated with authoritarian rule is really the symbol of political rule, of popular political rule, the people's rule in Rome. See how, that was the genius of the Italian fascists, was to expropriate the concept. You can expropriate the symbols of the popular. This is why Orwell says doublethink. That words, right now in our political life, the people who talk about freedom aren't talking about freedom. They're talking about other things. Equality is not equality. Those who speak endlessly about equity don't mean equity. Those who speak about equality really don't mean equality. Because the words don't mean what they mean. This is the nature of modern political life. So therefore, you have to look at what people say they mean and to see if the words actually mean what they mean, or are we engaged in a kind of doublespeak. But back to the division of functions of labor in this sense. The functions of here is that, one, we have 2 reasons. First, it was the Roman conception, but then it's made famous by Montesquieu and Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws, particularly in the chapter, in a number of chapters in his Spirit of the Laws. He will highlight the danger of despotic rule. In other words, how do we prevent despotic rule? Dividing power. Any political system that does not divide power will tend to be despotic. That means what? In other words, it will not be checked, and therefore can do what it wants and doesn't have to consent to the will. Now this leads us to a misunderstanding. Even though he will divide it in 3, he doesn't insist that all 3 be divided. there is this modern misunderstanding of Montesquieu that argues that, in fact, they argue in a weird way, because he puts the discussion in chapter. The chapter I give you is from book 11, chapter 6, which is the Constitution of England. This misleads everyone to think he's talking about the English. The English Constitution is this division of labor of the three parts. No. In fact, the real secret about the English Constitution is the chapter before chapter 6, where he talks about the English. There's a constitution that is the place where liberty happens. He mentions a whole bunch of political systems and the things they produce. The Spartans do war. They have all these different regimes and these things that have specific things of certain trade. Democracy has this commerce. He mentions these political states and some cities and nations, and that he gives them the function of them. And there's a kind of sadistic joke about Poland. In that line too, he says that where Poland is the place where, because of the Librum Veto, there's a tyranny of it, the one, or it ends up becoming that nobody's interest is protected. It's anarchistic. It suggests that the Poles are, because the liberty that protects the individual to that degree, where anyone can veto the system, this leads to anarchy, and therefore no one's secure. But he then talks about the Constitution that he says, well, he talks about the Constitution that is free, but he doesn't mention it. Then he talks about England. And then and the problem with England is this is where he introduces most clearly the division of labor. But he doesn't talk about England all the time. He talks about all these other regimes, all these other cities, all these other political systems. And he does mention England, but what does he talk about England? He talks about England only in light of the jury system. The judges, and the creation of the judge system, and how the jury system is not a class. In other words, the judges in England, he says, he understands that in England, judges, people are called judges, are magistrates who enforce the laws. They're not often deciders. The deciders in England are the juries, and who are therefore the term judges, as he's using it in French, literally means the one who decides, judges on this. And the judges don't judge. The judge merely enforces the law, makes sure the law is complied with, or makes sure the ruling is complied with. Who decides? Well, the jury. Well, is the jury a permanent interest? No, because why? It is an ad hoc body that comes to be for the crisis. It is picked of usually equals of the people being tried. It doesn't perform a permanent body, therefore does not have a permanent interest. And then upon the decision, it collapses and disappears. So it has no longevity outside the case. And therefore it does not become a permanent body. But if you have a situation where judges are a permanent class, and that they are deciding life and death, then what? They become a class that has interest and they have the ultimate power. Then and what is their interest? Maintaining their own power. So ironically, Montesquieu in his discussion of that thing, it's really about the secret of liberty of the English is not their divided power, but the fact that they have the courts who are independent, but not only independent courts, but what? It's the jury system that comes into being and then passes away. It doesn't have a permanent interest. It's the jury system that preserves the liberty of the English Constitution. And why it's the freest constitution, Montesquieu says, of all peoples. Because of the nature. Not because of the independent. See, everyone reads this as it means the independent of the judiciary. Well, no. It's independent judiciary may be useful. But what happens if the judges, if the judges are the one executing the rule, and if they're independent, therefore, that they are able to make the law as well, not only judge the law, Adjudicate. Remember, that's the problem. When judges make law, they become what? The legislator, not the adjudicator. The purpose of justice is to adjudicate. What is meant by adjudication? What is meant by adjudication? Can anyone here tell me? To adjudicate something means what? %99 of court cases are dealing with what? You think breaking law? No. It's about what is the real purpose of a court? Why do you have a court? Come on, why do we have a court? Why is there a court? You think it's simply because breaking laws?
No, decide whether the law was actually breaking.
Or maybe
Really?
for resolving
Disagreements, disputes. Bob, okay, you and you live near to each other. Go to this. She takes you promise that you make a promise that we're going to do this together and you're going to jointly do this, to buy this together. But then she then takes off with the toy or the product that this and uses it all the time and you don't get any use of it. So what happens? There was a promise. The promise was breached. So what happens? So do you go out there and kill her? Do you go there and stick it out and fight it with it? You know, like this? Well, you can't do that. Why? Because that creates what? Breakdown of peace in society. Revenge cycles. The Hatfields and McCoys, right? Or the famous Greek story, the Oiastaria, that you have the murder, everyone killing each other because of this. In other words, vengeance or stasis, seeking out for the harm parties using self-help to resolve their disputes leads to what? Disorder. The breach of the peace. And the crown needs to establish the peace. So therefore, what the king does? He creates courts. Because he can't hear every dispute. The king or the ruler can't hear everybody's little complaint that your two cows, your pigs go into her yard and eat her things, or your cows knocked down the gate over there and pissed in that person's gardens or something. In other words, all these little petty disputes that if they don't get solved, people solve them themselves with violence, right? And then violence begets more violence. Revenge, retaliation creates new retaliation. And those retaliation cycles are endless. So what do you need to do? The king is there to be an intermediary, to adjudicate, to resolve, to settle disputes. And there's a problem with this. Actually, the original method is the guy goes out there, the guy goes, okay, who's going to pay me the most? Who's going to pay me the most? Which one can pay me the most wins? This is one of the problems of the early judges. That once the king separated his power to judges and judges got to the thing, therefore there was a problem with judges. This is why the early nobles always refused the king would not make the rule himself because he did not want to appear thing. So he turned it to the fellow nobles, and they would create. This is the German tribal structures. The nobles and those people would never want to be tried by the king themselves because the king knew if he made a decision, he will make enemies of the other group and their friends. So what he needed to do is he needed to get an association of fair, balanced group, a size enough balance. You should get 12 people, 12 or more, sometimes 100. First it was called the hundreds, and then it went down to 12, at 20, and 12. And then who would do what? They would decide. And sometimes if it was the idea in English law was for a criminal charge, a capital crime, a criminal or capital crime, it had to be unanimous. But if it was simply disputes, it was majority. So the concept here is the jury decides. Why? This way the king, the judge, would not have an ability to pick favorites. The judge would always be an outsider, making sure things are fair, but he would not have the ability, therefore, to interfere with things. He'd only enforce the rule. So judicial adjudicative power is the power to that. Now, the classic conception, this is the famous division of power structure, ancient versus modern. Pay attention to this because this is kind of, important in the sense. The modern conception is the famous legislative lawmaking, which makes the laws, executives carrying out the laws, and the judicial power, right, which is the dealing with adjudicating. In fact, this is very simple. This will lead us to the same position Aristotle's, we talks about this. But for the ancient, I look at Aristotle's book 4, chapters 14, 15, and 16, where Aristotle talks about the different offices. Now, it's very interesting. He doesn't really, he just mentions the offices. Now, he divides, he will not talk about the offices in general. He will immediately go into the account of the offices regarding specific function. First thing is the deliberative offices. What is the deliberative? They decide and make decisions. They decide, they make decisions. Now the problem with this is where the classic, the modern conception blurs this a little bit. Because the executive also makes decisions on certain things. But his scope of making decisions is what? His scopes of is about doing things in acts and the enforcements of things. Or he's acting, the executive is acting as the sovereign representative as the whole. Now this is what Locke will call this federative power, which is weird because we think federal to this state, but he means it's the sovereign. There's two kinds of sovereignty. There's the domestic sovereignty and then federative sovereignty. On the domestic front, the legislature, the parliament, the legislature exercise sovereignty. But in the relation of state to state, or commonwealth to commonwealth, the king, or the chief executive, the presiding officer, head of state, is the one who gets to make certain decisions for the body politic in relation to this, including the supervision of elections. The supervisions of certain offices are going to in other words, when the parliament is going to be changing or out of session, they get to make decisions. So they decide in certain cases. Usually the parliament has made laws for them to do those things, so therefore it's not that they make them themselves, they're simply enforcing or acting, doing what the law says them to do. So therefore the modern conception often blurs, like the executive, the chief executive often has certain decision capacities, but often those capacities are given to him by either the constitutional text or through the law, therefore they're doing what the legislative act mandated. Therefore they're doing things, they act and they enforce. Judges are really enforcers in the Anglo-American system. But the real adjudicative power, judicial power, would thus be in the jurors, the ones who settle disputes. Now, in America that's weird because policemen are at okay. Polish policemen are really militiamen. They're really soldiers. They're merely an official executing orders under orders. They have no court power. They're not officers of the court. The British system, every police constable or sheriff, every policeman is a police department, or is considered a constable in the English system, or we say in America we don't call them constables, we call them police officers. But a police constable or a police officer or a sheriff or a marshal are all officers of the court. Therefore, they are the lowest form of judiciary. Therefore, they can settle disputes. Therefore, the local policeman on the block often in a big city, in a large city, the local policeman can, if they see people fighting, they can intervene. They can make a resolve of the situation on that. And that if the people aren't happy, then they can go to court. The policeman will he has to give his report. He'll make his report, because he has to write everything that happens that day in the incident. If he intervened in a dispute, he needs to report that dispute on the record. Every time there's a car crash or incident like this, he determines fault. He makes a report that indicates the question of fault. The policeman himself indicates a judgment at that moment of fault, which then a court, in a dispute, if it goes to the court, in other words, a lot of car crashes don't even go to court. They just simply go to the insurance agencies, and the insurance agency rely on the policeman's report. Therefore, they rely on the police report because it's a court document. And the policeman is acting as an adjudicator. See, do you understand the difference of how the systems really differ in this fundamental sense? That therefore, the policeman is required as an element of justice. He's also the enforcement of laws and the maintainer of peace. The Polish policeman is the militia. And what does the militia do? The European model, in German, this is what? The militia is really what? The maintaining of peace. And how do you maintain peace? You smack down hard at those who breach the peace. They're a hammer. They're only a hammer. They do nothing but enforce the law. This is why the English hated the militia. The English saw that the militia should be called by the civilian body. That if a king held a militia at all time and had to have a militia to enforce and maintain order, that usually meant that this was a despotic state. That standing armies or standing militias were kind of a kind of fear. The English would look at this as kind of a despotic ruler. That the militia should only be called in case of emergency and only for the sake of maintaining peace. What?
In the 18th century, Poland didn't have standing army, and it has fallen.
What?
It has fallen. We were under partitions.
Yes, but that's a different issue. The problem was you never had a unified system. You had a feudal construction. And when the May 3rd Constitution tried to create it, the existing power holders resisted it because they thought they were going to lose power. And they resisted it. Now, kings could make their own armies. The problem was that you didn't have money. You had to borrow money and get money from the magnates, or the magnates would raise money. And if the magnates didn't want to raise armies and support your cause, you were powerless. In other words, the standing armies. The standing armies question is not enforcement of law. It's the enforcement of royal, in other words, the political power. The English had no power or problem. The English system was designed that there was never a problem raising armies or raising forces. That was never a problem when there was a real threat. It was only a problem when a king wanted to do something internally. Yes, you have one.
Yeah, because I'm not quite sure, but I think in Washington's farewell address, he says he preferred the United States to not have like one standing army all the time, and only to organize militias, right? Yep,
because the idea that you get the militia organized. And that was the American military until the First World War. Until after the First World War, even the First World War, just before the First World War broke out, they created the National Guard system, which did what? It changed the militias it centralized and nationalized. The militias were always nationalized. That's what the Civil War was. The Civil War, the armies fighting the Civil Wars, in both North and South, were the various state militias under the banners, first of the Union, the North of the government of the Union, the United States government, and then later the government of the Confederate leadership had to create a kind of mirror of the U.S. government to create the Confederate Army, the Confederate leadership. which were mostly just Union officers, Union colonels and generals who decided because they were Southerners to. Actually, there was like one or two Northerners who were married to Southern women that became Southern, chose to be Southern military, but only a handful. Majority of the people. The reason why you left and fought for the South was because you were Southern. Not because you supported slavery often. Some people didn't support slavery at all, and still nevertheless. In fact, there's a funny story. Sherman was the head of the Louisiana Military Institute. And he was married. He was invited to side for the Confederacy, but he refused, and he went to become unemployed in Ohio. This is the. But again, the judicial powers here, the adjudicative, the settled disputes, the offices. See, this is the problem with the executive. The Greek political thought really has no concept of executive power. They have the concept of the offices, and the offices that do things, enforce things, and do like this. But they don't call it the executive. It's only the modern world which will coin the concept of the executive. It starts with Machiavelli. A little bit, it's the prince. It's the rise of the prince. And we have to understand the prince itself, its origins is found in the word principatus, was coined by Augustus to avoid the term rex at all cost. The prince only means first citizen, principatus. It is the first of the citizens. It is a civic provocation, but it doesn't really mean that. It means yes, it has the image, it has the appearance of being a citizen, but he's no longer a citizen because why? He's the first. He is the only in that sense. True one who's citizen. First becomes only. And instead of becoming a rex, which was a taboo term in Rome, the principatus became the norm. And then it became imperatorix, which just means, imperator just means what? Person who exercises power of life and death. Every general had imperatrix in the Roman conception. So therefore, the term the emperor was simply just a term used very late in way after the Caesars, the dynasty of Caesar. That term becomes, and then that's particularly we see Rome becoming from the principatus to in Roman history. You talk about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire had two stages: the principatus, there's the Republican and post-Republican, but usually that was still called the Principatus. Is the dominum, the dominum, the house, the household. Well, that was true under the Caesars. The Caesars, the household of Caesar and the household of the ruling, whoever held Caesar's title, was the ruling family, the rulers of the republic. But that's not pointing here. So office as the executive is very interesting, the idea of the executive. Here is the problem with let's say the American conception. Executive, legislative, this is the cycle. Most power, a lot of times what happens is we have three aspects. We have administrative action is where all, to get anything done, you need all three to agree. If you have two, you have incidental powers. Incidental, I think it's a typo in the graph. That's not my graph, it's a graph I found that does it right. That when you have two powers that intersect the other power, then you have enough power that you can do things. But it's not clear. The other power can then block it or frustrate it. And this is why this is kind of the frustrating aspect of this. Administrative action occurs usually when all three powers, the core powers of each branch, is oversighting each other in a certain thing. That's this is the classical American problem. That, in other words, when you get all three agreeing, intersecting, things work fine. When they don't intersect, then there's in other words, when they don't intersect, it's the areas where there is what? there is this, when the issue is over here, as long as these two are agreeing, if it's only over here, right, the issue, and you graph it out, you do the circles, you do the scope of the interest, if you need two, in order to get something done, a branch needs at least another branch to do it. The American system is two branches. In fact, ironically, the judicial branch is the least powerful. It requires the support of Congress can castrate it, or the presidency can create it, shape it. The president appoints judges. The Senate approves them. The House as a whole, the Congress as a whole budgets for it. It makes pass a judiciary act which shapes the Congress. It shapes its appellate jurisdiction. It defines its subordinate. In other words, all the inferior courts are created by Congress. In other words, the American Constitution gives to the legislative branch, Congress, the power to shape the courts. And it does. That's why they made the Article 2 courts versus Article 3 courts versus non-Article 3 courts, or administrative courts that don't have Article 3 jurisdictional rights. So we have a very complex structure. This was separation of powers mean. Separation of powers can mean what? That they have to have checks and balances. That why? You have, this is the problem. Does your legislature really have checks and balance over the ministers? Who's your executive? In Poland, who is the executive branch?
President.
Wrong. He's the head of state. He's not the executive branch.
The government?
The government, which are the ministers. Does the parliament really have a check over the ministers? No.
No,
because they can. Therefore, why does parliamentary committees exist? Is a parliamentary committee ever really there to check government power? To check administrative power? Therefore, is there division of powers in Poland? No. So anytime you hear a KO people crying about division of powers, they don't even know their own constitution.
Oh yes, that's true.
That you don't understand that the division of power, there's no such thing as separation of powers in Poland. You have a unitary power system, parliament, but there is craziness. It's the president. The president has weird powers, but not everything. He's the commander-in-chief. He has certain powers. He can intervene. He can go into the Sejm and interrupt them anytime he wants. I don't understand. I think Duda should go there. He should go to the Senate. He should go to the Sejm and basically call Tusk a lying thief. Who controls, for national security purposes, who controls the army and the police force? The president. So if the president thinks the government is committed treason, what can the president do? If the prime minister has made a deal that harms the Polish national interest, made a deal with German or foreign countries against the Polish national security interest, by the way, who is the defender of the Constitution in the Polish Constitution?
President.
Not the courts, the president. So if Duda wanted to, and Duda had the balls to, he could go into the Sejm, accuse Tusk in what Tusk is doing for violating the rules of law, doing these things, breaking the things like this, accuse him in the Sejm. Tusk either denies it or ignores it. If you ignore something, what have you done?
You silently admit that you did it.
So then the president, therefore, could then or order the armies to arrest the prime minister for the breach of the crime. Now this would
That
freak
won't
out.
happen.
Oh yeah, because why? Because the European countries would freak out, right?
Yes, and do the rest supposed to do it.
Exactly. That's the irony. That, in other words, you can do a lot of things as Polish president, and no one. The law. I mean, when I look at the Polish Constitution, right? I'm shocked at how much power the Constitution gives to the Polish president. Why? Because who was the Constitution designed for?
Like for a specific person?
Yeah, it was designed. Who was the original president of the independent Poland? General Jaruzelski. It was envisioned that Jaruzelski or someone like him, because the agreement was the military and those guys would get the most power. They would keep the offices of this. That the Solidarity would get parliament. Who cares about that? As long as the security services and that are controlled by this, and the courts and the security services are controlled by the old regime. They can give up that stuff. And therefore they created the Constitution to give so much power to the president, to dissolve parliament when it couldn't do things, to intervene and go into parliament and interrupt and speak whenever he wanted. Go actually read the presidential powers sometimes and you'll be surprised. The American president doesn't have the power to speak to he has to request the Senate or the House to allow him to speak at joint session. He cannot force it. He's there only at the invitation. Even the so-called State of the Union address was only originally a report sent to Congress. It was never really a president going there. If the president wants to talk to both sessions, he has to ask politely and they can say no. And they have said no in the past. Okay? So therefore, this is the difference. The Polish president can just simply say, anytime he wants, he can just come in there and just intervene and do this. Again, this is the division of power. This is the weird aspects of division of functions and functions of constitutionalities. Each constitution has different rules, but how each part can operate. Even though the system is this is why I call it, from a constitution's point of view, the Polish constitution is a mess. Okay. Do you have a Supreme Court? Do you have one ultimate judicial body, supreme judicial body in Poland?
No.
No.
We have Supreme Court and something that is called Tribunał Konstytucyjny.
No, Tribunal of State or the Supreme Court. There's a Supreme Court too, which is there's four courts. There's the Supreme Administrative Court, the Tribunal of State, then the Supreme Court, which here settles disputes and things like this, adjudicative events, and the Constitutional Tribunal. Which one is the place? If there's a dispute between these four, who settles it?
The Supreme Court?
Nope. No way to settle it. In fact, this is one of the big problems in Polish law. You have laws, acts of a minister, which are laws, and then administrative decisions by institutional bodies. Who is the court to believe is the ruling part? No one. They don't know. Judges. Therefore, this is why a lot of judicial action, judges will refuse to make a ruling because why? He has nothing about. He can then any ruling he makes becomes law. So judges are often scared to make a ruling because why? Because whatever he decides now becomes law. And what happens if that becomes contradictory to the statute? Does it mean, by the way, does his ruling undo the statute? No. So therefore, what happens? It's a mess. Trying to enforce legal institutions here in Poland is a complete chaos. Because why? You have all these different legal bases of things. And usually administrator is like, scared shitless. Because you want to understand why people don't do anything. People don't do anything is because there's too many competing rules that contradict each other. And they don't know what to do and they're afraid to act because if they act, then they'll be responsible. and everyone's afraid of responsibility. Okay. This is the famous systems. I talked about this already. Parliamentary versus presidential systems. Their division of every political system is going to have division, fundamental division of powers. This is the parliamentary model, where you have the citizens and voters. They elect a president and elect the legislature. That's a presidential model. In most situations like this, is that you have parliament people, the principals as voters, they vote a legislature, and then they create executive. Those are the two fundamental models, parliamentary and presidential. Who decides on this? This is a famous one. There's many ways. This is the famous decree. In other words, modes of deciding where all decide, modes of deciding where some decide. These are the variations. You can check this out, download the look file. It's not there. And then this is the famous 5 questions regarding political offices. In fact, how many offices are there? What do they have authority concerning? The length of time of those offices. Should the offices be permanent or of duration or long duration? In other words, any office you look at, or numbers of offices, these are the 5 questions you look at in a regime to understand the nature of these offices, the offices that deal with functions, doing functions. And then who should be selected for the office? Who should do the selecting and how they should be selected? These are the 5 fundamental questions in that sense of these offices. Now, in other words, in every type of regime, look what they do here. There's the famous thing. Each one has a favorite type. That is, the arrows are should be lower. The aristocrats prefer the educated. The oligarchs prefer the wealthy. The democracies prefer the free, the citizens, in other words. And then monarchy, there's no specific group. Usually, whoever pleases them, their friends. The monarchical system tends to favor. There's no specific group that they favor. Now, here are the famous method selection. This is why this map is interesting. The first criteria is 4 modes of selection, all appointing all appointing some appointing all, some appointing some. There's 3 methods. Election, you choose, right? Lottery, and then both elections by election and lottery. So you can either do it the first round of things people choose, and then the second round is a lottery. Or the first thing is a lottery, and then second round people choose. Okay? And then therefore, from the 4 by the 3, you get 12 combinations. All selecting by all for a lot, all selecting by all by election. In other words, everyone. This is the 4 divided 4 times 3 gets you 12 outcomes. And then there's 3 questions: who appoints, from whom or what group the officials are selected, in what manner and officials are people types. And he goes, and then therefore this leads us to 2 possible conjunctions that are omitted from the above list. That election by some, election is by both some and all, and then selection is by some and all. So therefore that's the very much dynamic of offices. Any office, the deliberative office, ironically, any office, the deliberative, the executive, in other words, any functioning offices, the lower offices, the magisterial offices, like the doing little offices, or then the adjudicative offices. All one of these are these mechanisms. Selection is always, if you elect someone, this is aristocratic or oligarchic. It's anti-democratic. To elect someone, to choose someone, this is aristocratic. Why? Because you usually pick the best person, or you think who is best, or you pick the wealthiest one. What is the democratic character of a selection? Lottery. Why? A lottery says it doesn't matter, everyone is the equal citizen, therefore anyone can do it. So therefore, and since it's a burden, everyone should be, ruling an office is kind of a burden as much as a benefit. So therefore, let's share the burden. So therefore, let's give it a lottery. Let's make it out there. Remember, in America, what is the only real what is interesting, in the English system, who has the power of life and death? Jurors, right? Freedom and slavery, life and death. How do you select jurors? Lottery. The lottery is therefore the democratic character. This is why the jury system is a fundamental democratic, because any citizen can be chosen. Now most citizens refuse and don't want to do it. Only the poor and the retired usually go do it. They find an excuse to get out of it. But the idea here is that it favors it is an egalitarian outcome. Lottery is. And that leads us to the famous judicial office problem, which again, from whom they're selected, on what matters decides, and what principle, and what matters, therefore, the different courts will have different matters. So who are they selected? Who selects them? What matters do they decide? Not all courts hear all same matters. That's why the classic distinction in American law is what? Some courts are trial courts for criminal acts, some are civil cases. Some are trial courts, some are appellate courts, right? Therefore, they decide who and what matters they decide. Criminal courts, therefore you can divide some cases in Greece. In other words, murder cases were tried completely different than other crimes, like treason and breaches of any other law. Murder was a holy crime, because once you spilled blood, there was a kind of curse of the blood. Therefore, they couldn't even try. A person who killed another person had to be tried outside the jurisdiction of the city. So they had an island in Athens where they tried they held the person accused of murder, and that they had a ritual court. The court was completely different than traditional courts. It was done by priests and done by orders, and it was and the whole idea of expunging the crime and preventing the cursed one, either that he be killed or be even if found innocent, unless he didn't kill him. But if he killed him, but there was a reason not to punish him, then he'd be forced to leave the country. He couldn't come back into the household because the blood of the killer would curse the land. So therefore, the Greeks had very strict laws about murder in that sense, which even the Jews had that too. If you look at murders, they had the Jewish law. The idea of murderers had to be treated different. Even if they killed someone by accident, they couldn't come back into the territory of the land. The manners that they selected, and last but not least, that's it. That's the court. So we have our things. We're done. We're on time, right? So I'll see you next week. Take care.